The name of the town I was born in was Derecske.
My name is Laszlo Berkowitz. I was born in Hungary, in Derecske, a small farming community near Debrecen, a better-known city.
My name is Neil Drugan. I was raised and brought up in the Derecske section of the Bronx.
My name is Nat Glass. I was born in Poland, in a small town, Pabianice, near Lodz, which is more famous. I was born in 1922.
My name is John J. Applehands. I was born January the 25th, 1922, in the city of Sterling, Colorado, approximately 100 miles east of Denver, Colorado, in the South Platte Valley. My parents were from in the Bavarian area of Germany. It migrated to the United States in 1905. It was five boys and 3 sisters. We all spoke German, and we all speak German today yet.
My name is Leonard Linton, and I was born in Yokohama, Japan, in 1922. That is because my parents both fled Russia when it was becoming the Soviet Union during the revolution. We lived in many countries in Europe, on and off, but the base was in Berlin. Some of my school friends joined the Hitler Youth, and they told me I ought to join, and so we could play games together on weekends. And so I joined this local Hitler Youth group. We had to break some windows in a big dairy store where my mother used to send me to buy cheese or milk or whatever for quick supplements if something was short, and I wouldn't do that, and I had big arguments with the leaders about that. So I volunteered, instead of breaking the windows, just to go in there and throw a few stink bombs in the store. They thought I was a big sissy because of that. So when the time came to beat up my friend, I simply said, I've had enough of this. I turned around and started hiking back. And I remember this fellow yelling after me that he will strike me off the roster. And I yelled back at him that he didn't need to do this anymore because I did this to myself.
Our people were religious, and that means that people attended, the men attended services daily.
We always had this feeling, we always had this, almost like well, it sometimes rains. Well, you're a Jew, you're being hated. I remember one day I was walking home from my temple in the morning, and as I make my turn, sure enough, there's this young man who was among the bitter ones, who really hated us. And he has a bull whip in his hand. And again, he was with his friends, and I was only with my brother. And he raises his whip to hit me. And I don't know how, I just, without thinking, or how I gathered the courage, as he grabbed his whip to hit me, I just grabbed his hand, and I pulled the whip out of his hand. And as soon as that happened, he just ran away.
Well, we lived in France for a number of years, and my father had a private banking business, and at one time he convened the family together and for dinner, and he said that it was not sound to stay in France because he thought that the Germans would attack France and that there would be war in Europe. And so he said there are only 2 places where it's worth going, and that is either to Great Britain, to England, or to the United States. He made a very good argument. He said that to live well and to succeed in life in Great Britain was much more difficult if you were not British born, whereas in the United States, all that matters is whether you were willing to work hard or not.
My father did have the permission to come to the United States with 2 children. There were 7 children and my mother. And once he had the permission to come to this country, he just could not make, he didn't have the heart to and to leave home and leave my mother, his wife, and the rest of the family home, and I decided to stay home, and whatever happens will happen to all of us.
Before the war broke out, which was September 1st, 1939, the factory was still working. But a few weeks before that, all of a sudden, most of the German employees disappeared. One morning we walked in, there was no German employee. At that time, we realized that the war should be coming, because why did the Germans disappear? I can recall, my mother, should rest in peace, always used to say, I don't actually care maybe if the Germans come in, occupy Poland. I don't want to see the Russians, because they remember the First World War, where the Russians, the Cossacks, were those people, the most atrocities. The Germans were the intellectuals. The Germans were the saviors. The German soldier was, he was a gentleman. And the new laws came out. The beginning, the law was just to wear an armband. Every Jew has to wear an armband. I think it was a white armband with a blue star of David, if I'm correct. Food was not going to be scarce, and bread especially. So we went out to the Gentile neighborhood to buy bread or something. We took off the armband. I went to a different part of the city to buy some bread because it was the Jewish bakeries didn't have enough flour to bake, what I have for some reason or another. And I stayed in line like any other person, Gentile or Jew, nobody knew who I am. And I was almost there in the line to buy a bread. And naturally the German police or the soldier was keeping the line going. And all of a sudden he comes over to me, said, "You come out." And I didn't realize from where, because there was a little Gentile boy. He recognized me as I'm Jewish, and he told the soldier.
German boy?
No, a Gentile boy from Pabianic. He recognized me. He could tell who's Jewish, who is not. And he told the soldier, and he said, "Come here, you there? You're Jewish, aren't you?" Well, naturally, you were afraid to say no, yes, and just, like they say, my head down, bend over, and just start running, because I was afraid. And you pulled me out. I said, "Please, may I have a bread?" Raus.
I graduated from high school just at the outbreak of the Second World War for us. Well, I knew I was going to go into the service. I read an article in the Reader's Digest about paratroopers. And I'd never been in an airplane, never saw a paratrooper, didn't know anything about it, but the article sold me. A friend of mine had a farm way out on Long Island, so I went out there and worked a few months with him because he was busy, and but then I was out there, and but in those days, well, you look up the sky, and the sky was always filled with airplanes, flights of them, 50, 60 airplanes are going over it all the time, back and forth. And you knew that, you couldn't help but want to get involved into I came down and volunteered, went down to Whitehall Street. So in July, I went into basic training and then down to parachute school. And after I finished my parachute school, I signed up for a demolition school down there. And I guess that by taking the demolition, I wound up as an engineer. The B Company 307 Engineers, 505 Regimental Combat Team of the 82nd Airplane Division.
Briefly after Pearl Harbor, I enlisted in the Air Corps. And prior to my receiving anything from the Air Corps, I was subsequently drafted. They sent me at that time then to Fort Meade, South Dakota. We were the first airborne units to be formed in the U.S., which we were glider pilots. After completion of that, I left. I was not satisfied with it, so I volunteered for the paratroopers and went to Fort Benning and took my jump training. You had more safety with a parachute on your back than you did in a glider. Gliders, we never had a parachute in a glider. In a glider, if you were hit, and that was it. The plane went down, and everybody went down with it. was never any possibility of getting out of them. And at that time, being young, I had had some difficulty with several of the officers in Fort Meade, South Dakota, and prompted my and several other fellows of going into the paratroopers.
When the war broke out, I was really straining at the bit to join the Army. But I was studying physics in Columbia. I was not a U.S. citizen yet. My father and mother basically prevailed on me not to volunteer. When I was drafted, I was sent to basic training in the 69th Infantry Division in Camp Wheeler, Georgia. And I felt that somehow I wasn't going to see the Germans at the end of my rifle soon enough. A demonstration jump team came from Fort Benning, and these fellows came wandering around all the company areas, and after seeing their jump and just looking at their demeanor, I thought this was more what I would like to be part of.
Now, my father was in the fuel business, lumber business. One day I was coming home from school, walking home from school, and I hear a policeman is walking on the street, and he's yelling out with a very happy sound, "They have taken the license away from Louis Rubin, to conduct his business." That was my father.
In Poland, the next step of the Germans, I'm skipping a lot of things because it was details. But the next step, General, was to create ghettos in every little town. We organized a Jugendfrede, the youth, especially the Zionist youth. After 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, we used to get together, meetings from different organizations. Every organization had 2, 3 people represent them. The youth I'm talking about. We had to gather someplace, to have a meeting and to talk about things. We couldn't talk in somebody's house. We found a place. On one of the shops, factories, was a police station. And we set one place in the police station on the 3rd floor where the shop is. The Germans were not going to look for us over there. Over there we're going to meet. So we were left. Sometimes we sneaked in at night. It's very difficult to describe because the street was, and we're just looking both sides and run across the street. In the ghetto, every block, by the way, when we created the ghetto, was to speak up. You could have gone from one backyard to another backyard within a block because we opened up all the walls. So in case something, we should be able to, because we spent most of our time over there. So how can we see each other? We couldn't go to the front door, so we had to go to the backyard. So we opened up all the walls from the backyard. So one particular block was open for everyone. And then we have to meet in the 5th block. So naturally we sneak into one door, and we had one door open across the street, and we sneaked in until we gathered all together. And we had a meeting on the 3rd floor, as I mentioned, of this shop, of this factory. But we're working at daytime. During the day we were working there, make soldier uniforms, coats. On the 1st floor, there was the police station. Over there, you could see every day arrested people being hung. And we looked down, and we saw the Gestapo, the Kripo, the Kriminalpolizei, and we had a meeting on the 3rd floor. This was also risking, because if they suspect something, we could have been caught. Resistance, no. This was our resistance. Our resistance would be education. Well, if we survive the war, we'll be prepared, we'll be ready. The youth will grow up, and eventually we'll go all to Israel, naturally, Palestine at the time.
As a consequence of the increasing difficulty in the economic situation, my family had to break up. Actually, my father went to Budapest to find work. My mother and my brother and sister remained at home. I went to Budapest at the age of 14 and a half, so I spent about 2 years in Budapest. I arrived at the Eastern Railroad station, Keleti pályaudvar. And as I walked out the main door, I was absolutely mesmerized, and as if I'd entered a world of magic. The trolley cars came from about 7 or 8 directions and circled in front, below the steps, below the railroad station. And for a moment, I have forgotten all the sadness and all the loneliness. I worked in this garden for 2 years and actually learned how to plant, how to graft plants, and how to take care of, how to cultivate entire fields of geraniums or begonias, or any number of wonderful plants whose names coleus.
Did you enjoy your work?
I enjoyed it and I loved it, and if I had stayed there, I most likely would have become a botanist by profession.
We went overseas in May of '43.
How old were you then?
18. We trained in North Africa to jump behind the enemy lines somewhere. We didn't know, of course. And on July 9th, '43, we left Tunisia, North Africa, to jump in Sicily. Well, Sicily was the first combat jump. It was a long trip, and I was beginning to get scared at this stage of the game in my airborne career. And I always had a secret hope that the plane would land in the water before it reached its objective, but luckily it didn't happen, because that would have been a lot worse than getting in there.
There was a radio in the Lodge Ghetto,
That's what I heard.
and people were listening to the Lodge Ghetto radio. And my father somehow was involved too. And when it was D-Day, June 6th, he came home and he said, this morning, 6 o'clock, June 6th, at 6 o'clock in the morning, was D-Day, was the invasion. It couldn't take too long anymore.
We were rounded up, all the Jewish people who worked at this central cemetery of the Jewish community of Budapest, and we were taken to a military barracks overnight, and then to a transformed brick factory on the outskirts of Budapest down the Danube River. I escaped from there and returned to Budapest for a day. I noticed that a column of people were standing in front of the office, and I asked them, where are you going? And they said, we are people who were arrested on the trolley cars, and we received permission to return home and take our personal belongings with us. And I was a young boy. I thought, what could I lose? I said, I'll join you. I was also taken in such a way. I wanted to go back at least once more. And I did go back, but I was so concerned about the fact that I did not tell my father. I was so concerned that he would worry about me that I returned.
And we were told to walk to the station. We walked to the train. The trains were there, cattle cars. German officers were there, and they were rushing us. Schnell, in a long range, get on the train. We were backed into the train. No food was given to us. I remember this clearly because it happened to be my birthday. It was on June 26th. It was on Monday, June 26th, when we were put on the train. There was a little window which was boarded up, that anybody shouldn't jump out of there. There was a man on a train who escaped from Poland because of what was happening in Poland. And now the same man is caught again, and now this man knew what awaits us. And he was trying to break over the crates on the window and jump out. And we didn't let him. I said, how can you do that? There were 80 people on the train. We accounted for it. One person is going to be missing. We will all be responsible.
First action was in Normandy at the St. Mary Police. Of course, it was dark when we jumped. It was 12:30 in the morning. Very hazy, rainy type of a situation. And we dropped at a very low level, which it was still between 450 to 500 foot. By the time your chute was fully opened, you were hitting the ground. Oh, the Germans were shooting. Yes, they were shooting, and they also had buried poles into the fields where the gliders were landing because in spite of everything, their intelligence knew exactly where we were coming and when we were coming. In fact, the prisoners that we had captured, we even told us that we were half an hour late because of the weather conditions, which we were. We start shooting everything that you saw move, whether it was a bush in the breeze blew or whatever, but you fired a couple of rounds into whatever it was, you know, you shot first and you asked questions later. And even a result of that, we had one lieutenant. He was a young lieutenant, but in stateside, I mean, he used to be, even when you're on guard duty, you know, he'd come up and challenge you, and you'd challenge him, ask for the password, and he wouldn't, you know. And one time I put a round in my chamber, and he started stuttering and bagging and shouting, you know. I said, well, you know, you got to respond. This is serious business, you know. He did the same thing in Normandy, and one of our riflemen shot him in the back.
In Normandy, I was wounded. Shrapnel leg. I spent 2 months in the hospital, and I came out of the hospital and got back to the company. I still had a dressing on on a leg with a little open wound, but it wasn't bad, but it had to be changed every couple of days. And I'm not a gung-ho, but everybody else was going, and I just didn't want to be left behind.
Finally, in June 29th, we arrived. Got in the morning, it was still dark, and we saw these long fences, a wire fence with lights, and couldn't imagine what those things were. Trying to figure out what this could be. Perhaps it's a factory, and this is the fence for the factory, and so on. Train stopped after a little while, and they were screaming and hollering, get out, fast, 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 like it was an emergency. Leave everything on the train. Nothing is marked. How are we going to know what's what? Just don't worry about it. Well, how can you leave things on a train? You know, there were 80 people there. Everything would get mixed up. And we came out of the train fast, and we were told to line up 5 in a row. And there was this doctor, Dr. Mengele, Dr. Joseph Mengele. And only reason I know his name because I was told that was Dr. Joseph Mengele. Now, I was with my brother and my brother and my mother. Now, when I came, as I was approaching Mengele, Dr. Mengele, he happened to ask me, how old are you? I said, I'm 16. I had no reason to tell him, to lie to him, because, you know, he asked me a simple question. He said, okay, you go to your right. Now, my younger brother, who was about 1.5 years younger, he was just as tall, broader than I was. Asked him, how old are you? He was 14.5. He went to the other side. Now, I saw my mother, and my mother was on the other side with holding the baby in her hand. It never even occurred to me to say goodbye.
Jews from Lodz, Poland, arrived in the ghetto, and I met one of them in the latrine of all places, and he asked me, and they knew, by the way, that we were very naive, and he asked me, tell me, what are those chimneys out there, belching all those terrible flames? I said to him, they must be the bakeries. After all, there are hundreds of thousands of people here, and they need to bake a lot of bread. This man looked at me, and he said, don't you know what this is? Don't you know what happens there? I said, I think it's a bakery. And he said that these are crematoriums where they burn people. I went back to my friends, and believe it or not, this is what I told them. Do not talk to these Polish people. They are so depressing.
There were some Jewish prisoners over there already. And jokingly they said, you see what's over there? And you look up and there was this smoke coming from the chimney. He said, that's what they burn. You watch out, they shouldn't burn you over there. I saw Dr. Mengele naturally, which is no question about. Oh, he showed me right and left, you know. And it seems wherever he showed me, I survived, you know.
My brother, who came into camp, but he wasn't with me, he was in another camp, and he was working in a particular section where they go to the trains when they arrive to Auschwitz and get the people out of the train, and they get the goods out, and they go through the goods and separate the goods and send them all to Germany, the food and clothes and so on. So he was in a better situation than I was. And I told him that I'm afraid that I have a good pair of shoes, and what was happening is if he had a good pair of shoes, very often these people, either the German officers or the leaders of these camp leaders or barrack leaders who were, as I said before, these German criminals, They wanted a good pair of shoes, get you shoes either for themselves or for black market purposes, sell it. So if they saw a good pair of shoes, they asked you to take it off, and they gave you a pair of wooden shoes or old, bad shoes. And I was concerned I'm going to lose my shoes that I have from home because they were fairly decent-looking shoes. So I told my brother about this, and so he says, look, I'm going to throw to you another pair of shoe, not just one single. I'm going to keep your left shoe. I'm going to throw your right shoe from a different style. Happened because he was working in this place where everything was brought in, where people came into this camp, and he threw me a shoe that was a lady's shoe, high, way above my ankle, had maybe about 1.5 inches heel. So now I gave one shoe away, and at least it was leather. So on one side I had my shoe from home. Other one was a shoe that my brother gave, and now I was fairly secure that nobody will want a shoe that, one is a lady's shoe, one is a men's shoe, and this is what I had for the entire time in my camp.
I was the first guy who came out of the building. He said, let's build an oven. And to me, build an oven was strange. So one guy got himself in the middle, and one body next to him at his back. And they're just like, how can I tell you, like bees around the honey. Everyone was sticking one to each other until we created a big circle of people. Maybe it could be 100, 200 people. And naturally, from the warmth from one body to another, inside the body, people were always warm. And after a while, the people who were outside the people from inside used to come outside, and the people from the outside used to go inside, and that's where we warmed ourselves. It was a human oven.
In this particular camp, there was a soccer field, but not for the people, not for the inmates. The soccer field was for the German officers. We were all driven to one side of in this field, and they took a board and they nailed to this post, to where the goalie was, and everybody had to go under this post. And those who reached the height of this particular board went to one side, and those who didn't went to the other side. Now they knew that if you reach that height, somehow we had the either intuition or whatever, call it what you may. We knew that these are the people who will be alive, and those who are shorter will not come in. Naturally, all of us try to walk very straight, or many of us try to walk on tiptoe. Fortunately, walking straight, I was tall enough, I made it. Well, when this particular selection was over, where they have put the kids from the shorter ones on one side, taller ones on the other side, those who were a little shorter knew the significance of this selection, and they broke out, and they tried to mingle with those who were taller. And by this time we were so hardened. We resented these kids. Why do you endanger our life? We are safe. We were told to come over here. You were supposed to go over there, and now you're endangering our life.
After having gone through this about twice, actually we snuck back and tried to pass again, and we failed. And then Jack said to me, we must sneak straight to the ranks of the strong. But there was a problem, because the unselected and the strong were divided by a street, and an SS soldier was patrolling this street, walking up and down. As he walked by us on one of these turns, about 20 feet from us, he bent over to tie his shoelaces, and Jack and I ran across from the weak to the strong and snuck into the middle of the column, making these boys quite angry because we have endangered them.
And that was the topic of conversation at home, what we did at home, what we ate, and what are we going to eat.
We had always to talk and talk. What will we do? The last thing we used to talk is about food, because the less on your mind, we thought that we wouldn't be too hungry.
We talked about how to evade selections. And in this also you had to be alert. Now that we knew what this place was all about, all our energies were concentrated on how to last another day, or ultimately how to get out of there. But no one we ever knew ever got out of there. The barrack was built as a long rectangular barrack, like all barracks are, and in the center of it was a long brick-like, low brick-like structure, which was built for heating purposes. And the bunks were on either side, were hundreds, as I said, 1,100 boys were lying prone and just with their heads sticking out toward the center. We sang songs. I remember, imagine to sing such sad songs. In wilden Wald, wie es regnet, wie es ist kalt, blonget immer Schäferle allein, von die Chayes zerbissen, von die Derne zerrissen, schreit und weint ein bitter Gewein. I think we sang it for entertainment. Early in November or late in October, we heard that they were going to send a transport of workers to Germany. And it was very important to be accepted as a qualified worker. We found out that they were looking for auto mechanics, machine reparatur, as they call it in German. And of course, all of us, students, high school students, seminary students, became instant auto mechanics experts, if you will. And so as I was standing